Welcome everyone. We're back for another edition of Trev Talks. Really excited to have you along. And this time round, we've got Martin Hyde with us, who is the Sustainability and Public Affairs Manager for Alupro. How are you, Martin?
I'm great, thanks, Trevor. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Busy time of year for everyone, but can't complain. Martin, please will you give people a bit of an insight into who you are, first and foremost, and then who Alupro are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Martin Hyde. I've worked in the packaging and environmental space for I believe up to 8 years now. I started off working for packaging compliance scheme Comply Direct, who are now called Beyondly, covering everything from waste electricals, packaging, batteries, wider environmental and net zero consultancy. And then I moved to Alupro a couple of years ago. Alupro is the aluminium packaging recycling organisation. So we're a material advocacy organisation, and effectively our role is to try and drive up the recycling rate of aluminium packaging and drive up the amount of aluminium packaging which is collected for recycling in the United Kingdom.
Great, that's fascinating. So what made you attracted to move to Alupro?
So I'd been working in the compliance sector for quite a while, and I was looking for something just a little bit different, but also a little bit more material centric. So I think it's easy to get caught up in working in every single different material, and you want to become an expert on every single one, which was interesting. But I just wanted to do something really focused on one material, and use the skills that I'd built up and experience I'd built up up to that point for something a bit different. And then the opportunity to work for Alupro as a not-for-profit and as a material focused and advocacy organisation was something I couldn't really turn down.
So if we were talking to our younger listeners, what are the things that you like the most about your role?
So for me, I'm a self-professed a bit of a policy nerd, and I really enjoy looking at how legislation works across industry and consumer aims to try and drive recycling and collect material that we're not currently collecting, work through the issues of how that affects consumers and how it all boils down to what the everyday person does in terms of when they make the decision about what bin to put something in, or when they make the decision about whether or not they are or aren't going to purchase a product. So I'm really interested in how that all boils down to good legislation and then good communication. And I think that's the important thing for me. Obviously, different people have different goals and interests, but I've always liked seeing how that system interacts and works together.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I think we've had a number of guests on the podcast who all very much care about consumer engagement. They care about that communication, which I think is an incredibly big challenge, not just in the UK, but internationally. So it's great to have someone that's very much at the coalface of having a positive impact. And that leads us into Recycling Room 101, because as we do on the pod, we have this feature where our guests try their best to get their topics, their bugbears, committed to Recycling Room 101. But the twist is we've got to try and work out how to improve things as well. We can't just chuck them in the bin and never see them again. So, Martin, I'm very much interested to hear what you've got to try and consign into Recycling Room 101. What's your first topic?
So the first one for me is DEFRA, or the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. It's specifically their approach to consultation. So we've had a lot of consultation opportunity with the government and with DEFRA since 2018 when they released their resource and waste strategy. And the whole aim of that policy document when they released it was, here's what we're going to do about increasing recycling, maximizing resource efficiency, and effectively progressing towards a more circular economy. And that boiled down into loads and loads of different policy things, from a plastic tax through to a review of the waste electricals recycling system, extended producer responsibility, which is a bit of a big ticket item at the moment, deposit return schemes for beverages. There's so much in there. But I think the issue we've consistently had throughout this process is the way that we're consulted with as industry, whether or not we're actually listened to, and then how those consultations are designed in terms of how it trickles down into something that we can contribute to productively. So yeah, that's been a big issue certainly for me, because most of my career has been spent responding to these consultations. So it's quite difficult to see that it's maybe not done in the best manner.
And so, if I may, because I'm certainly not an expert like you are, but I do have a particular interest in deposit return schemes. Previously to my current role, I worked at Biffa, and Biffa was nominated as the operational partner for deposit return scheme in Scotland, and that was a really exciting moment for the organisation. I know people personally that worked on the project who were incredibly infused and committed to delivering a deposit return scheme that was successful. But what I don't know is what goes on in these consultations and how decisions get made. So maybe it would be good to understand from your perspective what your feelings were on that process and how we might have actually done a better job of delivering on DRS.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the key problems we had when it came to the consultations around DRS is there was a lot of flip flopping and a lot of change of direction. So when the original consultation on that came out, it was clear that the direction that was headed was three core materials: aluminium, steel. Four core materials: aluminium, steel, plastic, PET, and then glass as well. And all of the financials, all of the modeling, all of that was based on the fact that these materials would be in the deposit scheme. That would allow us to communicate to people properly. It would align with generally, successful deposit return schemes on an international level. And then when we came through to respond to that consultation, there was generally support for that to go ahead as is with most of those materials. There was some points which I'll pick up later, and one of my other areas of concern, of something I'd want to put into Room 101, is actually related to DRS. But there were some areas where not everyone agreed. But the one thing that the public were absolutely clear on is that they understood the concept of having glass bottles, plastic bottles, and aluminium and steel cans as materials within a deposit scheme. What ended up happening is, after the second round of consultation, where DEFRA had put out a pretty clear cost impact analysis that showed that they had justified the inclusion of all these materials, they very swiftly and very suddenly changed their mind and decided to withdraw glass from the deposit return scheme in England and in Northern Ireland. And what that did is it effectively partitioned us into, rather than having a UK-wide deposit scheme, we now had a scheme in Scotland that had glass, steel, aluminium and plastic. We had one in England and Wales, which had steel, aluminium and plastic, but no glass. England and Northern Ireland that had steel, aluminium, plastic and no glass. And then one in Wales that would probably include glass, but it's not fully certain yet. And what that led to is complete divide. You've now got three different schemes. We've also got one in the Republic of Ireland, which has gone live earlier this month as well, which is also different in terms of how it works. And you can see the system start to tumble down. And it all really came from a lack of clarity originally in what we were being consulted on, and what was likely to change versus what wasn't. And I mean, on the glass exclusion point for England and Northern Ireland, we still haven't had a fair answer as to why that was withdrawn. We've had, piecemeal discussions from various ministers and DEFRA themselves, but we've not been given this is the clear reason why this had to be removed, despite the fact that all the consultation responses and all the public surveys showed that it should be included in the scheme.
Okay, so we always like to appreciate at least as much balance as we possibly can, but also what we could do differently in future to make it better. So in particular here, if you had a magic wand, how would you change the consultation process with DEFRA to improve it in future?
So one of the first things is the government are required to follow, when they consult, consultation guidelines, which sets out how you should consult, what you should consult on, how long it should last, etc. Throughout this process for deposit return, and also for the extended producer responsibility side of things, we've consistently seen that guidance not fully followed. A good example will be back in 2019. We had consultation on extended producer responsibility, and we were given, I think, 8 weeks to respond to it, whilst the minimum guidance at the time was it should last for 12 weeks. So you've got a shortened consultation. And the reason for that was because it needed to be done immediately, because there wasn't enough time to get the legislation through. And yet we're still in 2024, don't have the legislation yet fully laid in Parliament. So it's stuff like that. It's, following the guidance, consulting for a long enough time to allow industry to put a proper response together, and then actually listening to the feedback that's given. I think there's certainly a concern in industry that the feedback that we spent hours and hours of time pulling together and putting in an edited format, that could be succinctly read, was largely ignored. And I think if you consult on the basis of, here's what we're going to do, regardless of what you say, we're probably still going to do it, that doesn't really fill people with confidence, and it doesn't make them want to engage with that process. And I think certainly in my career, I've seen in the last 8 years, industries approach go from at the start, certainly to me, it seemed everyone was very excited and wanted to join in as much as possible, and felt they were working with DEFRA on this policy, to now it very much seems like really cynical. Well, if they've asked us a yes no question, unless we're 100% that it's a yes, we should put no with a but and a reasons number of things that we could support, just so that they don't take a yes as a yes across the board. I think there is subjectivity in response. If you ask 100 people the same question and you just give them a yes no answer, you'll get a response, but it's not really worth anything if you don't understand why they've responded that way.
Understood. Thanks, Martin. There's clearly a lot of passion and frustration, but also, I would say, professionalism that the industry wants to deliver. I don't think there's anyone out there that doesn't want there to be improvement and enhancement in the way in which we treat waste in the United Kingdom. And it is a bit saddening to hear that despite all of that, we're not quite there yet. And for those that aren't aware, DRS and EPR, which you'll have to go and Google when you have the time, have both been delayed because of the perhaps inefficient or ineffective consultation process and the lack of consensus, which is affecting our ability as a United Kingdom to achieve our recycling and environmental targets. And when you take it to a much higher level, a macro level, we've got a government that are therefore uncertain about achieving the commitments that they have made globally. And that's what it boils down to. We're supposed to be a leader in the Western world. COP, there was some controversy around our Prime Minister's attendance at that summit. And at the same time, we had news coming out of Whitehall that certain targets were going to be reconsidered, if we could put it that way. So what we've seen here appears to be a frustrating time. Hopefully, we'll see some improvement if people listen to Martin and follow the guidelines on how to consult.
Here's a quick message from our sponsor, Aura. This podcast is brought to you by Aura, bringing together leading consultancy, pioneering technology, and data-led insights to help organizations meet environmental compliance and manage sustainability every day.
Thanks for that, Martin. So what's the next topic?
So the next one, as it happens, is the where we are with deposit return schemes. So the current proposed deposit return scheme design for the UK. So I obviously already covered the fractured. We've got something happening in Scotland, something happening in England and Northern Ireland, something else happening in Wales, and the issues that's caused. And generally, I think we've gone through various periods in industry of people saying, oh, we want this, we want that. And now the thing everyone is saying is we just want something that works and ideally is interoperable across nations to some degree. I mean, I won't labour the point on the materials on glass anymore. I think this is the thing, and us, Alupro as an organisation, have been quite outspoken about this, and as of other organisations. But I think one of the things that we're really interested in seeing with the current DRS is the idea of variable rated deposits. So to give for listeners just a brief explanation of how a deposit return scheme works. Effectively, what we're looking at is you would, as a consumer, when you buy something in store, you would pay a deposit on that. So if you buy a bottle of drink or a can of drink, you would pay, say, a 20p deposit when you buy it. And then when you return that back to store, either hand it in manually or go through what's called a reverse vending machine, you would be given back that deposit. So the idea is it puts a financial value on that material, which helps to guarantee that you will return it and it won't be littered or it won't be mismanaged or put in the wrong bin. So you should drive a much higher collection rate. You should help to reduce littering rates, which is one of the key things that they've used as their financial and environmental justification of this policy. But you also then get a much cleaner stream of materials. So you've got just PET bottles, just aluminium cans, just steel. It's much easier to segregate that material. Now, one of the concerns we have, as certainly in the aluminium industry, is that the UK consumer quite commonly purchase soft drinks and beers as well in multi-pack can format. So you might buy a pack of 6, pack of 12 to take home, and then consume as you choose. Now if you put a 20p deposit on an individual item, then if you're buying one thing, obviously it's just 20p, and that whilst there is that financial engagement, as we've seen from the 20p bag fee and the scale up of that, people still forget, people still lose out, and people still pay. But if you're buying a multi-pack of 24, it's £4.80. So what you're paying up front is a lot more for the same amount of liquid as if you were to, say, buy a 2-litre PET bottle. Now, that is something that's difficult to manage under a DRS, because our concern is that people will inherently move to whatever is the cheapest option, especially given cost of living crisis, rising inflation, or briefly going back to the material issue, they will buy in a material which isn't included in the scheme because they don't have to pay their deposit at all. And that was something that has fallen foul of DRS overseas when it's been managed previously. So, yeah, one thing that we talk about a lot is a variable rated deposit. So that would be the idea that if a can or a bottle is under a certain size, it's say 20 pence, whilst if it's over a certain size, it's a higher level. It's up to 50 pence, maybe a pound. It doesn't fully make up for the cost differential, but it makes people think a bit more about it. And I mean, we've tested this with consumers. We've tested this with everyday householders in working groups, and generally the public understand it. They're quite good at getting their head around the concept that something this big you'd pay a bit more for than something this big. But what we haven't seen is that being driven in legislation. So it's mentioned in there, but it's not being fully driven. So one of the things I'd like to see is that's one specific point around the DRS design. There are loads of little intricacies of different things that everyone has problems with. But that's something I'd like to see. And I mean, in terms of a personal view on where we are with the deposit return scheme now, we've been working on this for quite a few years. We've just not yet been able to make it work. In the UK, as I said, Republic of Ireland have launched their scheme on the 1st of February, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. They also, by the way, do have a variable rate in their deposit, so it'll be interesting to see how that system works. I mean, obviously the first month's going to be a bit shaky. It always is with something new like this, but in a year's time, it will be interesting to see. But the rest of the UK, we've just not succeeded so far. I mean, Scotland, the example you used earlier, that fell apart very quickly when the kind of political wheels started turning and the public pressure started mounting. So one of the things I keep wondering in the back of my head is, would it be better if we focus on extended producer responsibility, which, as you said, people will probably need to Google, but effectively is working on packaging costs and transferring the costs of collection, sorting and sending for recycling from local authorities to producers. So it would mean that local authorities would receive more funding, but they'd have to collect more material and deal with it separately. Is it better to focus on EPR, and then when that's working and when that system's operational, then review if we still need a deposit return scheme? Because at the moment we're trying to throw two solutions at the same problem almost, and hope that some combination of them will have a positive impact.
Firstly, I'd like to say it's great to have someone so knowledgeable about those topics on the podcast. I consider myself a bit of a layman in comparison to you, but I'm in the industry, so I should know about it. I think it's a very fair point that you raised right at the end there. Are we trying to do too much at one time? And maybe focusing on one of them would help us progress. I think that my gut reaction to that is we've seen many other countries deliver on both EPR and DRS. I've got a map that I'm using in some webinars coming up, and it shows all of the countries that have EPR, DRS, eco-modulated fees. And here we are as the United Kingdom, and we cannot get our act together and implement any of those. And that's what I mentioned before about us trying to achieve these targets that we've committed to, these commitments, yet we're stalling at every hurdle, and that is frustrating. That I would just summarize it as incredibly frustrating. What I really like about your suggestions are that they're common sense. I can speak from personal experience that I always look out for the bargains at the grocers for a 24 pack of cans. And if someone said to me, you're going to go from £5 to £7.50 or even £10 to buy that at the counter, I'd probably steer away from it and say it's not worth the payment, especially as I would then have to watch my family and ensure they didn't put their cans in the wrong bin. That would become an absolute nightmare for me as a penny pincher in a cost of living crisis. So I can only imagine the sort of duress it would put the working family under when they just want to go about their business and try and do the right thing, but in the most convenient way possible. So, yes, I absolutely understand your points around the design of DRS, and I think your suggestions around that variable pricing structure just make common sense. Okay, so that's 2 down, 1 to go, Martin. What's the last one?
So this is a personal bugbear of mine, this third one. It's something that I come across all the time. Every industry, every material sector, most producers, most brands use this phrase indiscriminately, and it really grinds my gears. Is the term green. So to me now, in a cynical way, I've started just saying green. All green is a color. Using it to describe a product, a service, a role, an organization. It's just so misleading, and it means absolutely nothing. I mean, I've done quite a bit in my career, just mostly because of personal interest, to be honest, looking at the impacts of greenwashing, and which I appreciate includes the word green in it, but it's used in a slightly ironic manner, I guess. My worry is the general consumer. You and I, we work in this industry, we know a reasonable amount about it, but even then we're still not infallible. But the general consumer really struggles to understand what you mean when you give them loose terminology. But if it makes something sound better and makes it sound like it's a better option than something else, inherently you're more inclined to go towards it. And I think the word green, when we talk about green services, upskilling, green jobs, the green economy, it really, really is misleading, because it could be anything, and we just think it has some form of deep environmental benefit, but you can't put a number on it. You can't demonstrate value from it. So if it was up to me, simply using the term green should be thrown to room 101 and never be used again. And I think, in a way, the work from the Competition and Markets Authority and the Advertising Standards Agency on reducing misleading environmental claims has started us in that direction. So I think it is a term we're going to see decline maybe over the next 5 to 10 years. But to some extent, I think that the damage has been done, and we need to really, just say as an industry, we're going to put the hammer down and not use it anymore.
Yeah, I think once again, a very astute point. We've had guests on the pod who have been vehement in their frustration around labelling, around misinformation, greenwashing, green hushing. There's almost an industry just around understanding what being sustainable really is. And I'll be honest, I sit there sometimes wondering to myself, do I make any sense when I talk to organizations about how to be more sustainable? Because that just has so many meanings, and it means something to different people. How we expect consumers to appreciate what it actually means when it's really arguably a marketing ploy. We see so many products that are marketed in such a way to make people think they are sustainable, when in actual fact it's a buzzword and there's nothing to back it up. And so we do need stricter regulation, I believe, around how organizations promote their products. That isn't just with sustainability, it isn't just with recyclability. It's everything, isn't it? It's how consumerism is impacting our society and how capitalism drives that consumerism. But I think it's great that we are starting to talk about it more, and I think awareness is growing. That cynicism is growing, and people are more willing to educate themselves, which has got to be a good thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's also in the packaging sector, as an example, there's a internal communications issue here. I mean, the external communications issue is with selling products to people, and we're effectively lying about what it does, or making or misleading them. But there's also an internal thing of different departments working together, and certainly when I was working in compliance and going and dealing with all the different parts of organizations that worked on the packaging and converting that into a saleable product. The thing that you find interesting is there's a bit of a disconnect often between the sales, the marketing, and the packaging development. And in the packaging development, you've got the packaging technologists who know so much about how to make this product work in this packaging and what's the most appropriate thing, and there will be an aspect of what's environmentally maybe the least damaging thing that they can use for that specific product to still give consumer experience. Then you've got your marketing side who know exactly how we can convert this into something that a consumer will want and a consumer will benefit from. And then you've got the sales side of how we actually get that out the door and get that to people and use that product in a way to improve their lives or bring them happiness and all these great things. But they don't always talk to each other, and you don't always get you kind of have to start at the top here with the packaging tech guys and say, look, what can we actually say about this? What is the baseline we can say? But I do appreciate that saying, this toothpaste is slightly less terrible for the environment than a competitor's toothpaste, but it's still quite bad for the environment, isn't really that, it's not the most exciting message to get across. But I think, there's so much skill in marketing in the UK alone, and there's so much consumer focused industry that we've got to be able to crack a way of doing this where we can say stuff about products that doesn't mislead them but still retains the benefits and the positive messages about where we've made improvements.
Martin, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head though, and clearly you've had these thoughts in your career. I stand here as someone that is trying to educate businesses on sustainability strategy. And what you've just said there about how departments are not connected is the biggest challenge. If organizations truly took sustainability seriously and started at the very beginning with design and understood legislation, understood their own internal targets, how the product and the packaging will impact the environment, and considered the total cost, and I say cost in inverted commas, but I mean the total impact of a product, they would actually make significant change very quickly. The problem is that they have archaic processes that leave packaging to the very end. In fact, organizations don't even consider packaging beyond containing the product and marketing the product. And that needs to change. Rant over. I think you've come up with 3 very interesting topics that could go into Recycling Room 101. The one that really resonates with me is the current shape of DRS. Not that I necessarily feel like DRS has to be prioritized over EPR, but what it tells me is that there is such inconsistency in how we are operating as a United Kingdom. And that makes me cross. And the idea that we can't find common sense, common ground, just makes me want to headbutt a wall. So on this occasion, we're going to put the current format of DRS into Recycling Room 101. And here's my appeal to the people that make the decisions. Let's do something positive together rather than cogitating over the same thing every single year. How do you feel about that,
Absolutely.
Martin?
No, that sounds absolutely brilliant. Couldn't agree more.
Right, Martin, we're nearly at the very end, although I've loved this conversation. There's always time, though, for a Teach Trev fact. So, Martin, what have you got to teach Trev today?
So this would, in a way, links to the point you made earlier about the kind of the packaging being left to the last minute and the concerns around that. Because I think there's one thing that people don't often realise with packaging is that it does have a massive role in reduction of food waste. And one of the things I wanted to touch on was just it's a number of facts about food waste that, to be honest, when you think about, are quite shocking. So the first one is that in the UK, so this is 2021 to 2022. I couldn't find the figures yet for the most recent end of year, but we produce 6.4 million tons of food waste, which is spread out across all kinds of different categories. The data's all from WRAP, the Waste Resource Action Programme. Really interesting group to look at if anyone's ever after some nerdy numbers on waste. But that equates to 95 kilograms per person per year, which I think is absolutely shocking. I mean, that's a huge amount per average household. I think it worked out it was around 250 kilograms. So it's an absolutely astonishing amount of food waste. And you can also equate that to an amount of money. So you can convert that into a value of the waste that's being disposed is a minimum of £250 per person per year. Obviously, scaled up for a household that's even larger as well. So I mean, I think it's crazy how much food waste is disposed, and that's kind of the first half of the fact. That the other half, which I think this might be a Teach Trev one. You may already know this, but only 50% of local authorities in the UK actually collect food waste as a stream. I know neither you or I have access to food waste collections where we live.
Everyone. We actually live in the same street. So, yes, we don't have food waste collection. It grinds my gears every single year that my council tax doesn't contribute towards food waste collection. Rant over. Carry on, Martin.
It's exactly. But yes, so and that, I mean, that's 50% of local authorities. I can't find an exact figure on how that equates to the number of people. I probably could do, but that's probably a day's worth of Excel. But I think it's probably slightly more than 50% because you've got to account for cities, which some of the larger cities do have food waste in some areas. But yeah, it's a really tiny amount of authorities that collect it in the broad scale of things. However, there's a good news to this, which is hopefully from 2026 it will be mandatory for every local authority in England to collect food waste from the curbside, and I think it's going to be 2 weekly collections. Yeah, so that's, I think, a good news fact is that whilst we have this absolutely horrifying amount of food waste that has a huge amount of CO2 emissions associated with it, I think it's around the 18 million tons. The positive is we are moving one tiny step in closer in terms of we will have those collections mandatory. But the thing we need to do first is reduce the amount of food waste we're producing, because it is truly a horrifying quantity.
Well, that was probably 4 in 1, Martin. You win the award for number of facts for Trev. So let's just summarise. About £250 per person per year of food waste. On average per household, 250 kilos of food waste a year. Only half of our local authorities actually provide a food waste service. Bradford District Council, one of those, right? Guys, we need to sort that out. And from 2026, though, we will have it mandatory to have a bi-weekly collection of food waste. Hallelujah. I didn't know those facts. I was aware that there is a big problem, but to have it spelled out like that is quite infuriating. And we all try our best, right? I think there's so much pressure on households to do the right thing, but we need the support of the infrastructure. And that's what I'd be calling out for. The implementation of a service would at least give me the opportunity to use it. What will then end up happening is, will our council tax go up or down as a result? I think we know the answer to that. But at least we're making some headway towards reducing our impact on the environment. Martin, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've learnt a huge amount this time, and I hope our listeners have as well. Martin, thanks for being on Trev Talks, and we'd love to have you back again.
No worries at all. Thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Martin. See you again next time.
Thanks for listening to Trev Talks. If you'd like to be featured, or you've got a question you'd like us to discuss in the next Trev Talks episode, simply drop me an email using the email address in our show notes. Trev Talks is brought to you by Aura. Aura brings together sustainable packaging consultancy, pioneering technology, and expert-led insights to positively impact your business and our planet. Find out more about how Aura is helping leading businesses to achieve their sustainability objectives